Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 9th of January 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
You're back then?
Maybe it should be that you're the host and I'm back.
Yeah.
Well, it's very good to be back here in the UK Column studio. We've some, I think, particularly important news really to cover today, much of which focuses on our illustrious government.
Yes, well, we might as well just get straight on with it then, because here is Theresa May. Now, this is from the 14th of November last year. I just want to remind everybody what she was talking about at the Guildhall when she was giving her speech to the Lord Mayor's banquet, because it has some relevance to what she was discussing yesterday and today. And she said then, we meet tonight in a transformed world. A year ago, few amongst us would have predicted the events ahead, a clear, determined decision to leave the European Union and forge a bold, new, confident future for ourselves and the world, and of course, a new president-elect in the US who defied the polls and pundits in all the way up to election day itself. She said, change is in the air, and when people demand change, it's the job of politicians to respond. So this is particularly important. Change is in the air, and when people demand change, it's the job of politicians to respond. But, she said, it's also the job of those in positions of influence and power, politicians, business leaders, and others, to understand the drivers of that demand as well. And she said, and I think that if we take a step back and look at the world around us, one of the most important drivers becomes clear. The forces of liberalism and globalization, which have held sway in Britain, America, and across the Western world for years, have left too many people behind. Let's be clear, those forces have had and continue to have an overwhelmingly positive impact on our world. Liberalism and globalization have delivered unprecedented levels of wealth and opportunity. They've lifted millions out of poverty. She went on, it's fantastic how brilliant it is. And they underpin the rules-based international system that is key to global prosperity and security, and which I'm clear we must protect and seek to strengthen. But I can't deny, as I know you recognize, that there have been downsides to globalization in recent years, and that in our zeal and enthusiasm to promote this agenda as the answer to all our ills, we have on occasion overlooked the impact of those closer to home, on those closer to home, and who see these forces in a different light. And, you know, what she basically was talking about was fairness. Now, as I said, we have an article on fairness coming up on the website probably later this week. But she said, these people, often those on modest and low incomes living in rich countries like our own, see their jobs being outsourced and wages undercut. They see their communities changing around them and don't remember agreeing to that change. They see the emergence of a new global elite, that would be Tony Blair's global elite, Brian, and who sometimes seem to play a different set of rules and whose lives are far removed from their everyday existence. And so she went on, because if you refuse to accept that globalization in its current form has left too many people behind, you're not sowing the seeds for its growth, but for its ruin. So that was her position back in November last year. So what has she done then? Since then, pretty much nothing until yesterday when she has announced her shared society. Is that the big society?
Yeah, I think they've rebranded. They've had to rebrand Big Society because people have started to get a bit too close to the truth about what that is about, communitarianism. So rename it and pretend it's something different.
Right. So let's see whether that's correct or not. This is her article in the Telegraph yesterday. She wrote this. She said, when the British people voted in the referendum last June, this first paragraph grabbed me, Brian, and you'll see why. When they voted in the referendum last June, they did not simply vote to withdraw from the European Union. Silence there because
I had to take a sip of water, but yes, what did we vote for?
Well, she then goes on. They voted for a change in the way our country works, apparently. Total change in the way the country works. So it wasn't just a vote to leave the European Union. And the people for whom it works forever. It was a quiet revolution by those who feel the system has been stacked against them for too long. And an instruction to this government to seize the opportunity to build a stronger, fairer Britain that works for everyone, not just a privileged few. So fairness is right at the heart of this. That mission, she said, begins by tackling some of the burning injustices that undermine the solidarity of our society. So she's going back to the same theme she was talking about at the Guildhall. But our mission to build a stronger, fairer Britain goes further. And overcoming these divisions and bringing our country together is the central challenge of our time. That means building a shared society, a society that doesn't just value our individual rights, but focuses rather more on the responsibilities we have to one another. Now, this is another key point, because this is something that has been right at the heart of the constitutional reform agenda for the last few years, certainly since 2010. The idea that we don't have rights without responsibilities, that rights are not universal. They're something that are given if you meet your responsibilities, and this is a key point. A society that respects the bonds of family, community, citizenship, and strong institutions, and that we share as a union of people and nations, a society with a commitment to fairness at its heart. Fairness, it's all about fairness. And of course, right at the heart of this shared society is mental illness, apparently. And the headline here in The Guardian saying we will reduce the stigma around mental illness, says Theresa May. Well, I think she should, because if there's one candidate for a diagnosis, it's perhaps her.
I would agree with that. And in a few minutes, we're going to be mentioning Melanie Shaw and the treatment of that lady by none other than Theresa May.
Right. So these are her words again. So as we move through this period of great change for our nation, this government will seize the opportunity to build the shared society by embracing genuine and wide-ranging social reforms. We will move beyond the narrow focus on social justice and social mobility. Indeed, we will engage a more wide-ranging process of social reform so that those who feel the system is stacked against them, those just above the threshold that typically attracts the government's focus today, are also given the support they need, and that support is mental health. So this is part of her shared vision. She said that money is going into mental health, but it will always be wrong for people to assume that the only answer to these issues is about funding. Now, what was she talking about? £1 billion, apparently, of money going into mental health services. But in fact, other articles, this is Norman Lamb, who was the care minister under the coalition government between 2010 and 2015. He's saying, well, in fact, there isn't £1 billion going into it at all. In fact, it's significantly less, and that most of this money that is being earmarked, according to Theresa May, for mental health services is being used to fill other gaps in the NHS. So he said that he welcomes the fact that the Prime Minister is addressing the issue of mental health, and the focus on schools and employment is right. But he said that much of the additional £1.4 billion of funding secured for child mental health care is being diverted to prop up other services, and really said there was only £15 million is the figure that's actually going in. So if in fact there isn't any real new money going into mental health services, then what's this about? And I would suggest, Brian, interested to see if you agree, that perhaps this is merely a PR exercise. This is in fact the big society, rebranded, as you said. And I mean, part of this is, it's quite interesting that the many of the mainstream media today suggesting that this is a move away from the big society, from David Cameron's big society. And yet the Financial Times today, who in fact said that in their headline, also made the point that the words that Theresa May has used are identical to those of David Cameron in January 2016 regarding mental health. So therefore, it's not a move away from big society at all. It's simply a rebrand.
Rebrand, and you're slipping this in salami slice a bit at a time under the radar. What I get out of this, Mike, is it takes me back to a document. It was Colonel Rees Rawlings, formerly head of the World Health Organization, talking in 1942 about introducing the correct society, where people had to think in the right way. They had to trust the government to be led because they were incapable of running their lives on their own. And what was discussed in the document, we'll be able to bring it up on screen in the next couple of days. I don't have it with me at the moment. But what was being discussed was what was called mental hygiene. And you were mentally hygienic if you thought in the way that the government felt you should think, and you had the same sort of values. So I think what we've got here is that, of course, many people are suffering mental illness as a result of stress and pressures of the new life the government's produced. You make them ill, and then you're creating a new society around that suffering, which is a political agenda in itself.
Absolutely. And the other aspect of this, of course, is that any money that is available is going towards schools. So it's providing mental health services in schools, so that they're actually, again, pretty much ignoring the older generations and really looking to grab
going
the
for
children.
the children.
Yes.
And of course, this is what these very, very dangerous NLP and well-being programs are in the schools, which is getting into the children's heads as quickly as possible. Well, if the attack is on children at the bottom, as it were, of the ladder, then at the top we can see that they're going for elderly people. I found this an absolutely obscene headline by The Sun, because what it is doing is making a joke out of the deliberate deaths of people. So here's the headline: "Killed by mouth." And the statistics The Sun is using, which they're saying has come from the National Office of Statistics, is that 2 people are dying in the NHS each day of thirst and starvation. And I think we're going to say to that is a gross underestimate. More on that in just a second. But 2 dying in the NHS each day of thirst or starvation. Now, one of the first things to pick up on this is the fact that, of course, drink and food are now classed as medication, and medication can be withdrawn. But let's have a look at some of the statistics they're talking about. Malnutrition was mentioned on the death certificates of 297 patients who died in hospital during 2015, while dehydration was cited on 429. Care homes, the figures were 54 and 76 respectively. And the NHS Litigation Authority said it had paid out £311,750 in compensation to patients and families in the last 5 years after they claimed poor care caused malnutrition. Apologies for the little bit of extra text there. And of course, the Department of Health said these sorts of cases are unacceptable. That's why we've introduced a new care home inspection regime to take tough action, including closure of services where they aren't set up. They aren't up to scratch. So a very flippant response by the NHS. Let's have a look at the Mail here on the same subject. 2 die in the NHS every day of thirst and starvation, with patients in hospitals and care homes being forgotten to death. The language is fascinating here, Mike. We made a bit of a mistake. We forgot that we had patients. We forgot to give them liquids. We forgot to feed them. They died, but it was only really a little bit of a mistake. Anybody could make it. This is common purpose language, in my view.
Yeah.
Let's bring in Mr. Hunt, because this is the man at the centre of this. And we are going to say that very, very detailed and serious information that UK Column is receiving is demonstrating that this man has known for a very long time that people are dying in vast numbers in the NHS. What's the plan? Well, the Tory plan is to kill off the aged bed blockers and to introduce private healthcare for profit. So this is a very, very dangerous agenda going on in the NHS. And I better say at this point that we're, of course, not saying that everybody in the NHS is involved in this, but this is the agenda which is being pushed through the organisation. Some people are aware of it, high-level management posts, others aren't. They simply live the day-to-day chaos within the NHS as it's collapsed from the inside. Now, information that we've been given says that Jeremy Hunt has been fully aware since Staffordshire Hospital of hundreds of thousands of particularly elderly patients simply being disposed of within the hospital. So this isn't a question of mistakes or forgetting. These are elderly people deliberately put on a pathway to death in order to rid the state of these bed blockers. And of course, the other information that's coming to light is that their personal property, their homes, now being literally stolen by local authorities and social services. So Jeremy Hunt, fully aware of this, but he was also part of the government team that helped to quash the true statistics which started to emerge from Staffordshire. So we are looking to bring out a lot more information on this. And one of the events for early in 2017 will be a UK Column conference specifically on the subject of what is going wrong with the NHS. And we'll give you more details on that in due course. Well, Theresa May, of course, simply refuses to believe that there's any problem. So although we can see the effects locally, here's the headline from Plymouth, the Plymouth Herald: Plymouth man made to wait 5 hours for ambulance after car crash. If we look at the wider headlines across the UK at the moment, Theresa May simply says, crisis, what crisis? Well, this is part of the picture that's being built. This is a very heavy subject, but we need to deal with it. What we're now seeing is a massive drive for the privatisation of cemeteries and crematoria. And this is an article which came out of a complaint in Nottingham that a private crematorium was being built. Locals didn't want it. The government supported the planning application. And this is the company mentioned. Go on the website and have a look yourself. But this is one of very many private groups that are now working very closely with the NHS in particular, so that people can be moved out of beds and through the
ovens.
Well, you've said it, Mike, through the ovens as fast as possible. We're even seeing that only one doctor's signature is necessary on a death certificate, and we're also seeing a significant watering down of the coroner's office, so that where deaths have questionable events around them, we're not seeing the full investigation that would have taken place even a few years ago. So very, very dangerous times in the NHS here, Mike.
I mean, the question in my mind, Brian, is that the statistics that the Sun and the Mail were reporting were very small numbers. But of course, those are numbers where, correct me if I'm wrong, those are numbers where nobody could find any other excuse for the death of that person other than to say dehydration or malnutrition.
Well, from the information that I've seen over the last few months, very few of the reports even mention dehydration and malnutrition. There is some other reason given for death, and it's only the investigation by the families themselves that then brings to light that actually elderly parents in particular were severely dehydrated and starved. Then they're given other medication, many of them told that they'd got dementia, when it would appear to be the case that the dementia was induced by the dehydration and the starvation. So very, very dirty and dark things. So remembering that Theresa May has said, don't worry, we're entering a period of change. We're into the new fair society. Highly appropriate to bring up Melanie Shaw. Melanie Shaw, of course, still in prison. And as I'm going to show, we've got a little bit of an update. But let's remember, this is Theresa May that's helped put Melanie Shaw, child abuse victim and survivor and whistleblower. This woman has been repeatedly locked up in prison with one objective, and that is to shut her up, because she is one of several people based in the Nottingham area who know that the child abuse was involving members of Westminster. Now, we received this email. It says, Dear Brian, I received a letter yesterday from Melanie Shaw. She's asked me to let you know that she's due to be sentenced on the 11th of January this year, and that they're trying to get her sent to a high security hospital for obvious reasons. Other than that, she seemed in relatively good spirits, although my guess is that the Christmas card I sent is one of only several mails I've sent her, unfortunately. So that's the only one that got through. Now here we're starting to see the truth. We've had little glimpses of this over the past few months. The agenda is to get Melanie Shaw somewhere where she has simply disappeared from the public. And the hope is that with the disappearance of Melanie Shaw goes the evidence about those children abused and, as Melanie says, murdered in Beechwood and other Nottingham children's homes, with the involvement of members of Westminster. So a really wonderful society Theresa May's building here, Mike.
Yep.
Just astonishing. So we just put a caption in there, which is child abuse. How does Theresa May deal with it? Well, lock up the evidence. And we can't rely on our police, but what can we do with the police?
Well, we're going to arm them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the Metropolitan Police Federation. They've notified all their members that they're going to be asked whether they are willing to carry a gun. So they're saying the Met Police Federation is launching a survey to find out whether or not the more than 30,000 police officers in London would like to be armed at all times. Members are being asked today, Monday the 9th of January, whether they'd be willing to carry a gun or a taser, or if this prospect of being armed would put them off the job altogether. And they're saying that this is following recent terrorist attacks in Paris and Belgium. The Met has announced it would be deploying an additional 600 armed officers across the capital, but now the Federation is asking its members whether or not they would be happy to be armed on duty as a matter of routine. So there you go.
Isn't that a subject for debate in Parliament, Mike?
Certainly, in my opinion, is a subject for a national discussion,
Yeah.
a public discussion, and not one just for the police themselves.
Yeah. So this is probably drifting it in. We get a little bit of discussion into the public arena, and then we can say, well, of course, it's what everybody wanted.
Yes. Now, let's have a wee look at NATO. Hundreds of, this is actually a Reuters report, although it's Business Insider that's published it. Hundreds of US tanks and trucks arrive in Eastern Europe for exercises amid NATO military buildup. So this is the 3rd Armoured Brigade Combat Team, the 4th Infantry Division, and they have begun arriving in Bremerhaven in Germany. 2 ships arrived, were unloaded, a 3rd ship expected in the next few days. 87 Abrams tanks, 20 Paladin artillery vehicles, 136 Bradley fighting vehicles, 4,000 troops. On top of that, the 10th Combat Aviation Brigade, and 50 Black Hawks, 10 Chinooks, another 1,800 personnel for that, and as well as 24 Apaches and another 400 troops from the Attack Helicopter Battalion. So 6,000 troops for a large exercise. So the NATO spokesperson, Major General Timothy McGuire, said the best way to maintain peace is through preparation. This is just showing the strength and cohesion of the Western Alliance and the US commitment to maintaining peace on the continent. So that's good. So I thought we would have a look at a little video clip here from NATO, which is apparently all about how you stop tanks. It only lasts a minute or so. Let's have a look at that.
What we've done here is what we call an explosive abattis. The idea behind this is to close the route and deny it to the enemy to be able to use it and move forward. So we use explosives to blow down the trees, basically in kind of a tangled web like this, so that it's also difficult for them to come along after and try and remove these logs. It's very effective if it's done right. Actually, case in point for this exercise, when the enemy came up to this obstacle, they were actually unable to breach through it and they decided to go around. So it actually proves to be very, very effective. This area isn't that much different from parts of Canada where we're from. So the weather, obviously, we got snow, we got warm days and cold days. The forest, we're used to it, very similar forest to Canada, so we feel pretty at home here.
So there you go, Brian. They're going to have 6,000 troops in Eastern Europe to blow up some trees.
To cut down trees.
Yes.
Well, while that was playing, I just jotted down Enid Blyton's Guide to Warfare. This, to me, smacks of something absolutely desperate, that the public's got to be encouraged and got involved in what's happening by producing these mind-numbingly childish videos. A few trees are going to stop Russian tanks or anybody else's tanks. Well, maybe in some circumstances. But what is this about? I I've got to ask the question, what is this about? This is something to do with playing with people's minds.
Yes.
It's nothing to do with warfare.
Right. But anyway, nonetheless, thousands of troops in Eastern Europe at the moment on exercises. And alongside that, we've got to put this, because this is from just before Christmas, the fact that the Polish have finalized the deal with the US for missiles, as Poland is to receive US missiles following congressional approval of the sales deal. And this is for air-to-air missiles, but also JASSM, extended range missiles. And Poland is now the first country outside the United States to have JASSM extended range missiles. So this is a pretty significant thing. Poland's defense ministry said the country's Secretary of State in the Ministry of National Defense personally met officials from the Pentagon on Tuesday. This is just before Christmas, as I say, to pick up a host of agreements for supplying the missiles. So we're not only pushing more and more troops on a more regular basis into the area, but we're pushing more and more weapons into the area as well. And
of course, from the Russian point of view, the reaction time comes right down because these missile systems are being pushed right up on the Russian border. So it's exactly as President Putin has said, that this is an aggressive act, a deliberately aggressive act. And of course, the Russians have to react to it because these weapon systems on their borders mean that they have to take extra precautions because the warning time is down. So this isn't just we are pushing in armaments, rearming. This is a deliberately aggressive act. Well, let's bear that in mind when we have a look at this. And I believe it was our very own David Ellis that found this. It's UK Parliament is talking about the EU security and defence policy, and it's on the 14th of December, just before Christmas there. Why are we interested in this? Well, if I bring in the meat of the text, it's a little bit small. I'll take you through a bit. It says in the summary, EU ministers meeting in the Foreign Affairs Council affirmed in November 2016 that the Council is committed to strengthening the Union's ability to act as a security provider and to enhance the common security and defence policy as an essential part of the Union's external action. This will enhance its global strategic role, there we go, and its capacity to act autonomously when and where necessary and with partners wherever possible. The Council underlines the need to discuss and decide on security and defence issues on a regular basis. Why are we interested in this? Well, it's this statement here. In his explanatory memorandum of the 22nd of November 2016, the Minister for Europe and the Americas, Sir Alan Duncan, told us that the government supported much of the content of the Security, Defence and Implementation Plan. He noted that there are also elements which will not directly affect the UK after it's left the EU, such as the EU battle group, but we support what's going on. And then it goes on to say, Foreign Affairs and Defence Ministers also agreed an increase to the budget of the European Defence Agency. Details of this are set out in Document B. The Minister of State, Earl Howe, reports the UK agreed to an increase in the EDA's budget in line with inflation. So with one hand, we're apparently leaving the EU. With the other hand, we're actually buying into the creation of an EU military system, which of course will come with its own budget and procurement system. Barefaced lies, I think, from the government on this.
So you've tagged this Brexit. What Brexit as UK gives more to the EU Defence Agency?
Well, absolutely, because we'll bring her on screen now. Let's come back. This is the Telegraph. We're getting a glimpse of it. Here is Theresa May, almost a bit Merkel-like, I think, in that photograph. No hard Brexit for Britain. Well, she's telling the truth. There is going to be no proper Brexit because Theresa May, doesn't matter what the voters have asked for to leave the EU, she's going to renegotiate something. And of course, we're seeing in the background that the aim of this is to lock us further into an EU military system. I've said conservative lies, but of course the lies are coming directly out of the mouth of Theresa May.
Yeah.
So if we follow this through, this is quite remarkable headline, which we picked up from the Times. It says, Navy battling to save 500 million after a bungled deal for ships. Well, we don't know who bungled, somebody, we're not really sure who they are. 500 million at stake, but the government doesn't know what was going on. So according to the Times, the Royal Navy is scrambling to save an extra 500 million over the next 2 months after wasting money on ships it did not need because of a, quote, bungled procurement deal. This was OPVs, offshore protection vessels, normally involved in protecting the oil rigs and fishery protection. Somebody made a bit of a mistake, Mike. This is a bit similar to the NHS. We forgot a few patients, but in the Ministry of Defence, we made a bit of a mistake over procurement. So we're not worried who made the mistake. We've got to find savings. And what's being suggested? Well, we could cut the size of the Royal Marines, or we could mothball one of the 2 new aircraft carriers.
So they haven't even been finished built. They haven't been built yet. One of them has, but the other one's still in dock.
This is correct. So, but there's no analysis in here as to where this bungling has come from. But we've now got a Ministry of Defence that can't even order ships properly. Mm. So I thought we'd bring in the local headline here from Plymouth, because obviously Royal Marines are extremely well known in Plymouth, home of the Royal Marines. So here's the local paper saying that there may be a cut in numbers to meet what it calls a 500 billion shortfall. So bungling has now become shortfall, and as a result of that, we've got to cut the Royal Marines. Well, let's come back to our local MP, Gary Streeter, because before Christmas, we challenged Mr. Streeter on a number of issues to do with the Type 45 destroyers. And so we said that basically there was a shortage of experienced, trained engineers. The Type 45s were being built of disparate parts with different contracts, and this was causing trouble. There was trouble with engine replacements. We were saying that the engineers were unable to service main machinery, which was all contracted out. And of course, we'd seen on many occasions the press reporting that Type 45s were unable to operate in warm water. So a few other things. We talked about what was happening in the local naval base, and we also pointed out that this was all remarkable when Mr. Fallon was warning of the dangers of Russia. Well, I was surprised to receive a personal letter from Gary Streeter, and he said that all my fears regarding the Type 45 HMS Duncan, he's quoted, all my fears completely unfounded. Here he is. Remember that this is the man who was voting heavily for airstrikes on Syria. But when it comes to actually maintaining Britain's armed forces, well, it's a bit of bungling in his Conservative Party. I'll put this together, but I just wanted to remind people, this is the same Gary Streeter that backed Brooks Newmark, who made these outrageous claims about the use of chemical weapons by Assad in Syria, and then Streeter votes for bombs in Syria in order to solve a problem created by the US and the UK. So he enclosed a letter to me by this lady, Harriet Baldwin, who's Parliamentary Under Secretary of State and Minister for Defence Procurement. I don't know whether she's got a soap opera role as well, but here she is in the Vic, pulling a pint. This is her letter. And really, I just have to say that when we go through it, it simply ignores the key issues with this. So it doesn't comment on any of the real problems to do with changing engines. It doesn't comment on anything to do with the warm water problem. Most of it is simply putting out the government line on what should be happening. Okay, this one's come up on screen. I didn't think this was going to come up here, but so basically, she tells me what I've already read in the media, that HMS Duncan was towed into harbour by tugs as a result of a problem. But she then goes on to say, well, don't worry about any of this because the government's got it in hand as a result of its contractual arrangements between the Royal Navy and British Aerospace. So let's bring you into the second part of the letter here. It's this one. And now we've got no worries at all because we've got a Project Napier, which is going to correct the problems in the future.
Good.
So these are sophisticated and powerful warships. They don't work, but according to Harriet, don't worry because we've got a program where they will work in the future, but they are sophisticated and powerful warships.
Good.
And if you're worried about the way this lady thinks, we found this little one here where she was photographed with a teddy bear.
Good.
So she's very good at pulling points. She's very good at discussing teddy bears. What sort of woman have we got in charge of procurement? Well, she speaks French and Russian, which will be handy. But of course, her experiences with JP Morgan Chase. So here's the banker in there. But we've got a little bit of bungling 500 million procurement of those ships. We've got sophisticated world-beating Type 42s that don't work in warm water, towed into harbour, but it's all my imagination, apparently.
Yes. Okay, well, just 2 more days for the consultation on Section 40 for press regulation. And the Independent here, which is supporting the Hacked Off campaign without question. Their headline saying, Section 40, will the press be forced to pay the costs in court cases even if they win? And they're saying, why are we asking this now? Because the consultation on enacting reforms would force the press to pay the costs in court cases even if they win closes tomorrow. That's Tuesday, tomorrow. So what is this about? It's Section 40 of the Crime and Courts Act 2013, which basically says that if any press organisation doesn't sign up to the Royal Charter regulator, Royal Charter-backed regulator, that they would be subject to Section 40 of the Crime and Courts Act 2013, which would mean that if anybody takes them to court for libel or for any other reason, that they would be liable for court costs even if they win the case.
Yeah.
It is a spectacular situation, and it's absolute blackmail, isn't it?
Well, we are moving rapidly towards total state control of the press, Mike, and they have to achieve this because we've seen in the last few months what happens when the public are informed through social media, what they read over the internet. So they've got to get control of the press and media in order to run this change program through the system.
Absolutely. Now, the fact of the matter is that it was the UK column which broke the story of the agenda behind the Leveson inquiry, the common purpose agenda behind the Leveson inquiry, which eventually resulted in 12 or 13 pages in the Daily Mail. But I want to highlight this article, which has just gone up over the weekend on the website. We're all in this together, by Martin Edwards. He begins by saying the British press have long had the tendency to sensationalise the mundane and in relation to issues of national significance, either omit them entirely or report deliberately skewed half-truths and untruths. Take, for example, the 12-page Daily Mail series on articles into the role of Sir David Bell and Julia Middleton's common purpose in relation to the Leveson inquiry, into the behaviour of certain segments of the British media. Not only was Sir David Bell involved with organisations such as the Media Standards Trust, which spawned the Hacked Off campaign to set up the inquiry into possible regulation of the press, he also sat as a senior member of the Leveson inquiry panel itself. He shared that platform with 2 others having common purpose connections. Martin says it was the UK column that first exposed the behind-the-scenes role of common purpose in our Leveson Inquiry Exposed series. Unfortunately, readers of the Daily Mail series of articles were led to believe that, quote, common purpose graduates are simply the left's answer to the Old Boys Network. In a direct assault on investigative work by independent media, the Daily Mail stated that common purpose has attracted the obsessive attention of a more outre internet conspiracy theorists such as David Icke, as well as bloggers on the far right. So in this article, we're all in this together. Martin Edwards is demonstrating that the Daily Mail's conclusion is not only woefully inadequate, but he's absolutely demonstrating how broad and how wide the common purpose conspiracy, if we're allowed to use that word,
That's what it is.
Because it's a criminal conspiracy. He ends up, he points out here the common purpose continue by saying that partnerships matter. Cross-sector partnerships are hard to get right. However, when the sectors, public, private, and NGO work together, much can be achieved. Our political leadership has sought to destroy the family, the church, the nation, all things which bind us together. This is Martin's words again. We must refuse to follow them to perdition and instead rebuild what they've wasted. I think I've made a mistake there, but we'll come on to that in a second. Another article that I want to highlight is Nationhood versus Nationalism. That's where that final quote came from. To apologise. This is another article that's gone up on the UK Column website by David Scott, and making some really excellent points about the difference between nationhood and nationalism, and I recommend that everybody reads that. Now, while we're doing advertisements, I'll just also remind everybody that Fracking Nightmare was recorded yesterday at the Kirby Misperton fracking camp. It's being edited up as we speak, and we'll be playing that out at 7:30 tonight on ukcolumn.org/live. So do join us for that, 7:30 this evening.
Excellent.
Now, open society needs defending. Remember what I was talking about with Theresa May at the very beginning of the programme, what she said at that Mansion House speech. She said the change is in the air, and when people demand change, it's the job of politicians to respond, she said, but it's also the job of those in positions of influence and power to understand the drivers of that demand too. And the points that Theresa May was making in November and December last year were also echoed by others, including Mark Carney and whatnot. And now we're seeing even more people coming out of the woodwork. George Soros himself complaining that his open society needs defending. And he's saying that that liberal democracy is failing all across the Western world. This is because what he calls the open society is in crisis. And of course, he blames Vladimir Putin for it. He says Germany emerged as the hegemonic power in Europe following the Second World War, but it failed to live up to the obligations that successful hegemons must fulfill, namely looking beyond their narrow self-interest to the interests of people who depend upon them. He said that compare the behavior of the US after World War II with Germany's behavior after the crash of 2008. The US launched the Marshall Plan, which led to the development of the EU. Germany imposed an austerity program that served its narrow self-interest. With economic growth lagging and the refugee crisis out of control, the EU is on the verge of breakdown and is set to undergo an experience similar to that of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. And so he's complaining that two leading contenders for the French presidency, Marine Le Pen and Francois Fillon, are close to Putin and eager to appease him. So he keeps harking back to this World War II language. Of course, he knows World War II very well because he worked for the Nazis in Hungary during the Second World War. So he absolutely understands what he's talking about there. But he keeps invoking this language and complaining about Putin's so-called dominance of Europe. And he says, I'm particularly worried about the fate of the EU, which is in danger of coming under the influence of Russian President Vladimir Putin, whose contempt of government is irreconcilable with that of open society. Yes, it is laughable, isn't it?
It is laughable, yeah.
But it's not just George Soros, because here's NATO at it themselves. This is the NATO Review magazine. Will the populist wave wash away NATO and the European Union? And they say that anti-establishment populism is undeniably on the rise across the West, from Donald Trump's election pledge to drain the swamp in Washington through Brexit to the ascendancy of movements such as Italy's Five Stars on the left and Germany's Alternative for Deutschland on the right. A rejection of old orthodoxies and with them political elites and institutions is proving a powerful appeal. So they are also panicking about the destruction of Europe and particularly the destruction of NATO and the European Union. And the question is that the concern I have about this, Brian, because undoubtedly this so-called populism is genuine. But the so-called powers that be have a tendency to know how to best run with the momentum to reach their own goals in spite of it. So we've got to be pretty careful about that.
I think we have, but I think the first instance we can take this as the other side saying that they've been badly hurt. What has hurt them? Truth, information, evidence coming up to the surface, and people picking up on it from a variety of sources. So they are absolutely saying, what are they most fearful of? The truth. And if we can pump this out by every means possible, then people in whatever country they live in are going to be best placed to deal with this very malevolent agenda, political agenda that's being pushed through. But if Soros is worried, we can say that other people at the towards the top of the power structure are also going to be very worried indeed. But I wonder whether Soros is additionally worried because hasn't Putin put out an arrest warrant for him, I think. Never did track that down as to be true or not, but it's a nice story. I can't imagine that Soros will be going on holiday in Russia anytime soon.
No.
Okay. Well, that brings us to the end of today's news. Some very, very serious subjects. Watch out for Theresa May because, of course, she comes over as such a nice blue rinse Tory, that nice lady with the nice clothes. But this is the woman who has created, as Home Secretary, one of the most vicious state surveillance systems in the world, certainly in the Western world. That is still in existence. Now she's moving to arm the police and, of course, to get as many people as possible branded mentally ill if you don't agree with her version of the government. So dangerous times in Westminster in particular. And if you have been following the case of Melanie Shaw, Melanie is going to need a lot of support. Whatever happens at this court case in the next couple of days, she is going to need immense support from the public if she is to be extracted from Theresa May's gulag to silence those who are trying to expose child abuse in Westminster. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.